The Prose Edda, also known as the Younger Edda, Snorri's Edda, or, historically, simply as Edda, is an Old Norse work of literature written in Iceland in the early 13th century. The work is often assumed to have been written, or at least compiled, by the Icelandic scholar and historian Snorri Sturluson around the year 1220. It begins with a euhemerized prologue, a section on the Norse cosmogony, pantheon and myths. This is followed by three distinct books: Gylfaginning, Skáldskaparmál and Háttatal. 7 manuscripts, dating from around 1300 to around 1600, have independent textual value. Sturluson planned the collection as a textbook. It was to enable Icelandic poets and readers to understand the subtleties of alliterative verse, and to grasp the meaning behind the many kenningar that were used in skaldic poetry. The Prose Edda was originally referred to as simply Edda, but was later titled the Prose Edda in modern collections to distinguish it from the collections titled Poetic Edda that are largely based on Codex Regius, a collection of poetry composed after Edda in 13th century Iceland. At the time, versions of the Edda were well known in Iceland, but scholars speculated that there once was an elder Edda which contained the pagan poems which Snorri quotes in his Edda. When Codex Regius was discovered, it seemed that this speculation was correct, and so the name came into common usage, despite later studies showing Edda was composed first and at most connected by an original common source. Etymology. The etymology of Edda remains uncertain. There are many hypotheses, and little agreement. Some argue that the word derives from the name of Oddi, a town in the south of Iceland where Snorri was raised. Edda could therefore mean Book of Oddi. However, this assumption is generally rejected. Anthony Fawkes, author of an edition and an English translation of the Edda, considered this was unlikely, both in terms of linguistics and history, since Snorri was no longer living at Oddi when he composed his work. Another connection was made with the word othr, which means poetry or inspiration in Old Norse. According to Fawkes, though such a connection is plausible semantically, it is unlikely that Edda could have been coined in the 13th century on the basis of othr, because such a development would have had to have taken place gradually, and Edda, in the sense of poetics, is not likely to have existed in the preliterary period. Edda also means great parent, a word used by Snorri himself in the Skáldskaparmál, that is, with the same meaning, the name of a character in the Rigsthula and other medieval texts. This hypothesis has attracted François-Xavier Dillman, author of a French translation of the Edda, who said, "It seems likely that this person's name was chosen as the title of the work due to the fact that it was a collection of ancient knowledge, or, in the words of acute Gis Boyer, the grandparent of all sacred knowledge." A final hypothesis is derived from the Latin Eddo, meaning I write. It relies on the fact that the word creda is certified and comes from the Latin credo, I believe. Quote, "It seems likely Snorri would have been able to invent the word. Edda in this case could be translated as poetic art. This is the meaning that the word was then given in the Middle Ages. The name Seemundar Edda was given by the bishop Brynjolfur Svensson to the collection of poems contained in the Codex Regius, many of which are quoted by Snorri. Brynjolfur, along with many others of his time, incorrectly believed that they were collected by Seemundar Frothi, and so the Poetic Edda is also known as the Elder Edda. Manuscripts. 7 manuscripts of the Edda have survived, 6 compositions of the Middle Ages and another dating to the 1600s. No one manuscript is complete, and each has variations. In addition to 3 fragments, the 4 main manuscripts are Codex Regius, Codex Wormianus, Codex Trajectionis and the Codex Upsaliensis. Codex Upsaliensis was composed in the first quarter of the 14th century and is the oldest manuscript preserved of the Edda of Snorri. It has the advantage of providing some variants that are not found in any of the three other major manuscripts. It is preserved in the library of the University of Uppsala. The Codex Regius was written in the first half of the 14th century. It is the most comprehensive of the four manuscripts, and seems closer to the original. This is why it is the basis for editions and translations of the Edda. Its name is derived from its conservation in the Royal Library of Denmark for several centuries. From 1973 to 1997, hundreds of ancient Icelandic manuscripts were returned from Denmark to Iceland, including, in 1985, the Codex Regius, which is now preserved by the Árni Magnússon Institute for Icelandic Studies in Reykjavik. Codex Wormianus was written in the mid-14th century. It is still part of the Árni Magnússon manuscript collection, originally created by Árni Magnússon in Copenhagen. Codex Trajectonus was written around 1600. It is a copy of a manuscript that was made in the second half of the 13th century. It is preserved in the library of the University of Utrecht. Authorship. The assumption that Snorri Sturluson is responsible for writing the Edda is largely based on the following paragraph from a portion of Codex Upsaliensis, an early 14th century manuscript containing the Edda. This book is called Edda. Snorri Sturluson compiled it in the way that it is arranged here. First it tells about the Asir and Ymir. Then comes the poetic diction section with the poetic names of many things, and lastly a poem called the List of Meters, which Snorri composed about King Haakon and Duke Skulli. It has been noted that this attribution, along with other primary manuscripts, are not clear whether or not Snorri is more than the compiler of the work and the author of Háttatal, or if he is the author of the entire Edda. Whatever the case, the mention of Snorri in the manuscripts has been influential in the acceptance of Snorri as the author of the Edda. Contents. Prologue. The prologue is the first section of 4 books of the Edda, and consists of an euhemerized Christian account of the origins of Nordic mythology. The Nordic gods are described as human Trojan warriors who left Troy after the fall of that city. According to Edda, these warriors settled in northern Europe, where they were accepted as divine kings because of the superior culture and technology. Remembrance ceremonies later conducted at the burial sites degenerate into heathen cults, turning them into gods. Alexander M. Bruce suggested that Sturluson was in possession of the Langfethgatal or a closely related text when he composed the detailed list of gods and heroes given. He noted parallel sequences in the Langfethgatal and the Edda, noting the second appearance of a Cid figure as both an ancestor and a descendant of Odin in both. This figure is expanded upon in the Edda, detailing Skjaldur as Odin's son after his migration northwards to read Gotland and his ordination as a king of Denmark. Gylfaginning follows the prologue in Edda. Gylfaginning deals with the creation and destruction of the world of the Nordic gods, and many other aspects of Norse mythology. The section is written in prose interspersed with quotes from skaldic poetry. Skáldskaparmál. Skáldskaparmál is the third section of Edda, and consists of a dialogue between Agi, a god associated with the sea, and Bragi, a skaldic god, in which both Nordic mythology and discourse on the nature of poetry are intertwined. The origin of a number of kenningar are given, and Bragi then delivers a systematic list of kenningar for various people, places, and things. Bragi then goes on to discuss poetic language in some detail, in particular high-tea, the concept of poetical words which are non-periphrastic. For example, steed for horse, and again systematizes these. Háttatal. Háttatal is the last section of Edda. The section is composed by the Icelandic poet, politician, and historian Snorri Sturluson. Using, for the most part, his own compositions, it exemplifies the types of verse forms used in Old Norse poetry. Snorri took a prescriptive as well as descriptive approach. He has systematized the material, and often notes that the older poets did not always follow his rules. Translations, editions. Snorri Sturluson, 1988. Edda, Prologue and Gylfaginning. Edited by Anthony Fawkes, London, Viking Society for Northern Research. ISBN 0-903521-210. http //vsnr web publications.org. UK. Fawkes, Anthony. Edda, Skáldskaparmál and Háttatal. London, Viking Society for Northern Research, 1998. http //vsnr web publications.org. UK. Fawkes, Anthony. Háttatal, 2nd edn. London, Viking Society for Northern Research, 2007. http //vsnr web publications.org. UK. Heimir Palsson and Anthony Fawkes. Snorri Sturluson. The Uppsala Edda. DG 1142. http //vsnr web publications.org. UK. Facsimile of the Uppsala Edda. Ed. Snorri Sturluson. myths.This. ed. by Guthrie Johnson. http www.heimskringla. No. Wiki. Edda _Snorri _Sturluson. Critical editions of all major redactions of Edda in PDF format at Septetrianalia.net.